Good morning. The chairman of the opening ceremony, Dr. Sumet Yamnun, former Secretary General of the Office of Higher Education Commission, Ministry of Education, distinguished representatives of the host of the event, namely representative of the Office of the Education Council, Ministry of Education, representative of the Office of the Basic Education Commission, Ministry of Education, representative of the Office of the Higher Education Commission, Ministry of Education, representative of Burapha University, distinguished representatives of the co-host of the event, namely representatives of Secondary School Administrator Association of Thailand, Elementary School Administrator Association of Thailand, Thai Association of Science and Technology Education, the Royal College of Pediatricians of Thailand, the Pediatric Society of Thailand, and organizer and founder of Educa, Mr. Sinchai Kietpapan, CEO of PICO Thailand Public Company Limited, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony of Educa 2011, the 4th Annual Congress for Teacher Professional Development, official event of Thai Teachers TV. This is an international conference, CPD workshop, educational showcase and trade exhibition for education policymakers, school principals, head teachers and educators, including educational staffs. As you know, Educa is one of the biggest events that serve as the central role in supporting teacher professional development, with Educa 2011 presenting concepts, innovation and knowledge to assist teachers' inspiration in developing their classroom activities and achieving high-performance classrooms. One of the major challenges for Thailand and implicitly for other countries is how the education can be at high standards for all. What are the critical directions and actions that can lead to change and the improvement? How can the system be reformed successfully and sustainably? Educa has great opportunity to have the presence of world-renowned state-of-the-art speakers specialized in system reform and state-of-the-art lecturers in other important key areas for education improvement. This is the unprecedented opportunity for Thai educational community to learn, discuss, and share with the real-world educational experts. It is now the opportune moment. May I invite Mr. Sinchai Kietpapan, Chief Executive Officer of PICO Thailand Public Company Limited, as organizer and founder of Educa, to kindly present his welcome remarks and report to the chairman of the opening ceremony, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sinchai Kietpapan.
Good morning, Your Excellency, distinguished professors and teachers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to extend a warm welcoming to Educa 2011, the 4th Annual Congress for Teacher Professional Development, to all of you. Similar to previous years, Educa 2011 also got big support from both public and private sectors, which is the main factor that allowed Educa to happen. For PICO, we always realized the importance of education as a social responsibility, and we not only do it in words, but also in actions. This is why we designed our services, especially knowledge communication, to serve both business and social needs. As a part of PICO knowledge communication, Educa has been growing continually each year to become the best platform where our teachers and educators can enjoy updating, learning, and sharing their experiences. A global education movement, new technologies that enhance the effectiveness of teaching and learning. Since 2007, Educa has clearly positioned itself as a niche event for teachers. Year after year, theme of Educa has followed world educational trend. In 2009, Educa came up with the theme Quality Teacher, Quality Education. That was to emphasize the best way to improve the quality of education. We cannot look at anything further than teacher. In 2010, Educa introduced development, the new direction for education success. In this year, we sent the message to continue teacher professional development, which is one of the key success factors to improve our education. And Educa itself has become one of teacher development tools that teachers from all around the country has recognized and accepted. For this year, reform, reform, reform is our highlight. In order to reach global educational standard, we cannot focus on one dimension. We need to change the whole system. Educational resources, school systems, development process. Today, educational professors and experts from all around the world are here with us. Learning from our gurus, I hope that we together will find the right answer for Thai education. On this special occasion, I would like to thank our keynote speakers and guest speakers for being here with us today and eager to share us their great experiences and world-class knowledge. I am confident that Educa 2011 will not only bring value, knowledge, and great inspiration to all participants, but also create an educational network for teachers, educators, and educational trade agents. Last but not least, I would like to express my great appreciation to Office of Education Council, Office of Basic Education Commission, Office of Higher Education Commission, and the Faculty of Education, Burapha University, for giving us your confidence in joining us to make this event remarkable. The benefits and enjoyments that our teachers gain from this event will be a main factor to measure the success of Educa 2011. Additionally, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sympathy to those affected by current severe flooding, especially our teachers who intended to join this event but cannot make it as to this damage. I truly believe that the improvement of our education will help relieve this kind of problem in the future. And I am very pleased to make Educa to be one effective tool that supports our education development. Finally, I would like to extend my warmest welcome and gratitude to all the teachers who are here today and to everyone who care about our teachers and the education development in Thailand. Without all of you, this event will be meaningless. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinchai Kietpapan. May I now invite Dr. Sumet Yamnun, former Secretary General of the Office of Higher Education Commission, Ministry of Education, to kindly proceed onto the stage to deliver the opening speech, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sumet Yamnun.
Professor Dr. Vijit Sisaan, former Ministers of Education, Professor Dr. Yong Yuttawong, former Ministers of Science and Technology here in Thailand, honorable guest speakers, professors, teachers, delegates, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you to Educa 2011. Please let me begin by passing my appreciation to the host of Educa 2011, an annual congress for teacher professional development, which now has become a must-attend event for all teachers and educators who want to be updated with the global education trend. Educa have shown us a good collaboration between private and public sectors who see the importance of education and ready to give their hands to enhance and improve the education development of our nation. As Educa is also an official event for Thai Teacher TV, the members are able to meet and share their experience, and importantly, where the Thai Teacher TV network will be enhanced. Therefore, I would like to regard Educa as one of the best platforms for PPP collaboration model. To see some of you here today is a good sign for Thai education development. There might be many reasons for each of you to attend this event, but I am certain that the one reason that brought us here today is to decide to see how the future improve our education system, as well as continuing the professional development. And I truly believe that we are in the right place and the right time. For Thailand, education development has been a priority of every government, as the qualities of education reflects to the qualities of the people in the countries, which means our abilities and potential to contribute to the growth of the nation in terms of economic development and social progress depends on the qualities of our education system. The main objective of education development is that we need to prepare our citizens for tomorrow and significantly to build our citizens of tomorrow. Our education reform started when the Parliament passed the National Education Act in 1999, which was so-called the Restructuring of Education Administration Act. But the second decade of education reform had been created last year by focusing on 4 issues underpinning quality learning system: the qualities of Thai citizens, the qualities of teachers, the qualities of school and learning environment, the qualities of education management. And the frameworks of education reform focuses on the result. Education system must be tied to outcomes in terms of the proficiencies in core subject knowledge, and also the new set of skills that highly value in school, work, and community. The education system should reflect the real worlds of living, the real worlds of work, and the utilization of the local natural resources. We need to move away from the separation of an independent curriculum to the harmoniously continuing curriculum from primary secondary, and to tertiary education. We have to do all these, and we cannot do it alone. The government has to work with the private sector and education administration, and also the educational institution. Collaboration in PPP form will be extensively required. Further, to reach the global standard, we cannot only look inside and learn from our experience, but we need to look outside and learn from others. Although there may not be one solution that can be applied to all countries, but at least we'll see various good models that work effectively in some countries, which fortunately be able to apply it and make it work for our countries as well. Today, EDUCAS allow us to open the door and meet the world. All keynote speakers we have here today come from different countries around the globe, full of experiences, and they are ready to share their knowledge with us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sir Michael Barber, Chief Education Advisor at Pearson Group. I believe your keynote today, combined with your past experience in the public and private sector, will be a good guidance for our education development strategies, which the government is currently working on. I also would like to thank Professor Jogi Loima, Administrative Principal of the Wiki Teachers Training School, University of Helsinki. Finland is one of the best performing countries, and with a world-class system. I'm sure that what we will learn from you, and you're going to talk today on the curriculum development that is essential for the 21st century skills, especially for our head teachers who has joined us for today's conference. Thank you, Mrs. Julie Hu, Principal of the Raffles Girls' Schools, and Mrs. Mary Cherian, Directors of Pedagogical Research Laboratory, the Raffles Schools, the Raffles Girls' School, for joining us today. It goes without saying that Singapore is one of the successful countries that achieve in education development within this region. I'm certain that we'll learn that differentiated instructor for differentiated classroom are essential for our people to grow and develop in school. And I would like to pass my appreciation to Professor Howard Gardner, the founder of multiple intelligence theory, who has pre-recorded his talk for us today. Last but not least, I would like to thank Associate Professor Dr. Kun Ying Sumonta Prombun, members of the Higher Education Commission, Ministries of Education, and members of the board of the Institute for the Promotion of Teaching Science and Technology, to be here with us today to share the Thai perspectives on beyond the informative teaching and learning. Finally, I firmly believe that we can all learn a great deal from EDUCA 2011, from the international conference and workshops, and the exhibition that are being shown. I hope that all of you will use this event as the platform to strengthen your knowledge and be as inspired to improve your education starting within your own classroom. Let's equip yourselves with the passion of excellence, qualities, and vision. Now I would like to declare the opening of Educa 2011, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumet Yamnun. Educa 2011 has now been officially opened, and we shall now move on to the state-of-the-art address under the first theme of the whole system reform, how the world's best performing systems can come out on top, and how the world's most improved system keep getting better. We are much honored to have with us today the distinguished speaker on this subject, who is a leading authority on education systems and education reform, Sir Michael Barber, Chief Education Advisor of Pearson Group UK, former Chief Advisor to former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Sir Michael Barber is a leading authority on education system and education reform. Over the past 2 decades, his research and advisory work has focused on school improvement, standards and performance, system-wide reform, effective implementation, access, success and funding in higher education, and access and quality in schools in developing countries. In the newly created role of Chief Education Advisor, he will lead Pearson's worldwide program of research into education policy and efficacy, advise on and support the development of products and services that build on the research findings, and play a particular role in Pearson's strategy for education in the poorest sectors of the world, particularly in fast-growing developing economies. Before joining Pearson, he was a partner at McKinsey & Company and head of McKinsey's global education practice. He co-authored 2 major McKinsey education reports, How the World's Most Improved School System Keep Getting Better in the year 2010, and How the World's Best Performing Schools Come Out on Top in the year 2007. He is also a distinguished visiting fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Exeter. He previously served the UK government as head of the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit and Chief Advisor to the Secretary of State for Education on School Standards. Before joining the government, he was a professor at the Institute of Education at the University of London. And ladies and gentlemen, let's meet Sir Michael Barber.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And can I apologize for my voice? It's rather faded. They're bringing me some water. It's a wonderful event, and I thank all the organizers for putting on such a fantastic event and for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you all very much for coming. It's very encouraging to see so many motivated teachers in Thailand rising to the challenge of improving Thailand's education system. So thank you for that. And can I also, as one of the previous speakers mentioned, extend my sympathies to those teachers and their families and communities that are suffering from the floods in Thailand. And I hope and pray for all of you elsewhere in the country that the damage is not too bad. We around the world will be thinking about you. One of the things when you think about the modern world, when you think about the 21st century, is to try and imagine what it's going to be like in 10 or 20 or 30 years. And that's very difficult to do because the world is changing very rapidly. I don't know about when you first saw a computer, but I first saw a computer nearly 50 years ago in 1963. I was 7 years old, and my father took me to the factory where he worked, and his job at that time was to introduce the computer into the factory. And the computer was about the size of the stage that I'm standing on, and there were maybe 20 staff running around this machine that whirred and buzzed and hummed. And the only thing that computer did was print out the invoices for the customers and the paychecks for the workforce. Didn't do anything else. But it was a state-of-the-art computer. That was in 1963. On the 12th of May 1997, something very important in world history happened. A computer beat the world chess champion at chess. The computer was called Deep Blue, and the chess champion was called Garry Kasparov, and the computer won. That was only 30 years or 35 years between the computer I saw when I was 8 and a computer that could beat the world chess champion at chess. And now I have one of these, and probably all of you have something like this, and this can do more than the computer that beat Garry Kasparov, and a lot more than the computer that my father introduced into that factory in 1963. So this is a rapidly changing world. There's some other things about the world that we're going into. In 2050, there will be 9 billion people on planet Earth. When I was born in 1955, there were 2.5 billion people on planet Earth. So the population of the planet will have multiplied nearly by 4 in 100 years. What's more, since this decade, half of those people have live in cities. There are 7 billion people on the planet now. Half of them live in cities. In 1851, that was the first time in the history of any country that more than half the population lived in cities, and that was in Britain in 1851. And then in 1920 in America, half the population of the United States lived in cities, and now it's half the population of the world. And in 2050, it will be an even bigger proportion of the world. So the cities like Bangkok and London and Toronto, this is the new normal. Whereas for most of human history, most people lived in the rural parts of the world. And those modern cities, because of modern transport, because of immigration, because of the nature of global dialogue, all of our cities are multicultural, diverse places. In London, 1/3 of the workforce was born outside of the United Kingdom. In Toronto, 57% of the population was born outside of Canada. So not only we've got a crowded planet, we've got an urban planet and a very diverse set of cities. So there's another challenge for the 21st century. The pace of change in technology, the pace of change in global population. And then think about the economic growth. The 9 billion people in 2050 will expect to live the lifestyle that the relatively wealthy people live now. They'll expect to live, to put it in a simple terms, like Americans or Europeans. And that will demand a huge amount of economic growth between now and 2050 just to keep pace with population growth, never mind to keep pace with growing expectations. If you add up all the economic growth in human history from the days of Angkor Wat in Cambodia or the pyramids in Egypt, add it all up to 1950. So that's a lot of economic growth, thousands of years of economic growth. In the next 20 years, we will create that much growth again. And the 20 years after that. That's a good thing for the 9 billion people, but it's a challenge to maintain a sustainable planet with that much growth and that much population. So how will we manage those challenges? And then even in spite of all the economic growth in the last 50 or 100 years, even now 3 billion people on the planet live on less than $2 a day. So we have an urban planet, a crowded planet, a planet facing economic challenges, and an unequal planet. If you think about it, if there are 3 billion people now living in poverty, that's more people than there were on the planet as a whole when I was born, because that was only 2.5 million. So we've got more poor people now than we had in the whole of the world only 50 years ago. And then add in, as we put stress on resources like water particularly, but also fertile land, and these stresses of inequality, we see conflicts all around the world, in many parts of the world. So this is a very challenging time. It's also a time of huge opportunity. So when I think about an education system, when I think of what all of you do to try to create a better education system for Thailand and a better future for the Thai people, like your colleagues around the world, I think, what is the purpose of education in meeting those challenges? And I can say confidently that none of those challenges can be solved only by education, but I can also say confidently that none of those challenges can be solved without good education. Good education is part of the solution to every problem that human beings face all around the planet. So the work you do is fundamentally important to the success of human beings in the 21st century. And all of us around the world need to learn as fast as we can how to improve our education systems, to make them better. Even though they've improved, we need to keep making them better to make sure that in 2050, those 9 billion people can live fulfilled lives on a sustainable planet. That's why education matters not just in Thailand, but all around the world. Incidentally, another thing that makes education a bit more complicated is just the amount of information in the world. This year, just this year, 2011, we will add to databases around the world more information than in all the books that have ever been written, just this year. And it's getting faster all the time. So making sense of all that information is a challenge for every human being, whatever they do. And it's a challenge for teachers because they have to interpret all that information and explain things of value to the children in their schools. So if I come to my presentation, all of those challenges are there, but I really think there's a decade of promise ahead. I really think that by 2020, just 9 years from now, we could make a big transformation of the education systems around the world, here in Thailand, in my own country, Britain, and everywhere else. It's necessary because of the challenge I've set out, and it's possible because over the last 15 years, we've developed a lot of knowledge about how to reform education systems. We know what to do. The big challenge is making sure we actually get it done. The challenge in the 20th century for education systems was to educate an elite. Every basic education for everybody and an elite that could run the country, lead the country's businesses, put professors in universities, and be part of a dialogue. But actually in the 20th century, we didn't worry too much about getting everybody to high standards. But to solve the problems of the 21st century, whether it's the economic problems or the social or the environmental problems I mentioned, we have to get everybody to high standards. Of course, some people will fly even higher, but everybody, every child in your schools and in all the schools around the world needs to reach a much higher standard of education than we expected 50 years ago. It's a very different era. So I want to start by just explaining what I think a good education for every child should include. And to make it simple, I summarized it in a brief mathematical formula. So being well educated in the 21st century involves meeting this formula. And developing this formula, I read the books of Howard Gardner, who you'll hear from this afternoon, and his book, 5 Minds for the Future, is a very important, very influential book. So if you start inside the bracket with the K, K stands for knowledge. We need to make sure that every child leaves school, say age 16, 17 or 18, with quite a considerable body of knowledge and skills. They need to be able to read and write well. They need to be able to do basic mathematics well. They need to have some idea of the history of their own country and of the human race. They need to have some understanding of the world they live in and how it works, physics and biology and those kinds of things. So they do need a body of knowledge. And much of that knowledge is the same all over the world. Mathematics doesn't change at the boundary between Thailand and Malaysia, or between France and Germany, or the United States and Canada. Mathematics is the same. Algebra is the same all over the world. So some of that knowledge is global, and some of it is country-specific, local to the place. But the children do need to learn some basic knowledge, the story of where they came from and the world that they live in. But that's not enough. We might have thought that was enough 50 years ago, but it's not enough now. So they need also the T in this equation, which stands for thinking. They need to learn how to think. They don't need a separate lesson in thinking. They need to learn how to think while they're learning mathematics or the national language or history or geography or science. But the teachers need to teach them how to think. And if you think about your own life, your own working life or your own daily life, there are many different ways of thinking. You can be very reflective and on your own. It's an important way of thinking. You think about yourself, the things you face, the problems you're facing up to. You're reflective. That's one way of thinking. And then there's another way of thinking when you've got a meeting in 5 minutes with the principal and you're getting your head together. You're getting your head together and thinking, what am I going to say? Under time pressure, so rapid thinking under pressure. And then there's thinking in teams, in small groups. And then there's thinking deductively or inductively. Then there's thinking creatively, imaginatively. There's thinking logically. All of these are different ways of thinking. And when a child leaves school, they should have consciously learnt all these different ways of thinking because they all matter in different circumstances. So they need to learn those things through as they're learning the knowledge. And then the third thing they need is they need the L in the equation, which stands for leadership. The ability, by leadership, I don't mean the ability to run a large organization, although that is important. I mean the ability to have influence on people around you. A leader is somebody who, in their family, can help shape the debate, the discussion about what to do for the family, or in their community can shape what should happen or influence what should happen in their community, or in their class can influence what the class decides to do, or in their workplace can influence what happens in the workplace, improve the products, improve the services, improve the working lives of the people who work there, improve the lives of the customers. So by leadership, I mean the ability to influence other people. And children need to learn that in school. We might have thought it was all right 50 years ago to have a few leaders in a society and a lot of followers. Now we need people who can make decisions for themselves in groups, in communities, and shape their own lives and help shape the lives of others. So we need people with K for knowledge, T for thinking, and L for leadership. Now that is a big challenge to achieve high standards for every child in that. And to learn leadership, you need experiences of different kinds. You might need to learn to be in an orchestra, or to climb a mountain with a small group, or to go on an expedition, or to lead a sports team. So all those experiences that help you learn how to be a leader are important. So that's what's in the bracket, and then outside of the bracket is the E. And the E stands for ethical underpinning, the values and beliefs that we need. Because you could have knowledge and be able to think and be a leader, but you might be a very bad person. You might influence people the wrong way. You might apply your knowledge and your thinking in a way that was destructive. Our modern cities are very diverse places. Everybody has to learn how to get on with people who have different views and beliefs from themselves. So if they grow up with the right ethical underpinning, that will be good and the cities will be successful. If they grow up hating people who disagree with them or come from a different background or a different country, we will have big trouble in our cities. So this ethical underpinning is extremely important. We need people to grow up and think about how they can make the world a sustainable place for all living things. That's an ethical perspective. So in our schools, I think we need to set a very high challenge. Children who are knowledgeable, can think for themselves, can learn to be leaders, and have a view of the world that will make the world a better place for all of us. That's a big challenge, and the only place that any society can be sure that children will learn this is in the school. Maybe they'll learn it in a family, but we can't be sure. Maybe they'll learn it in a community, but we can't be sure. but they can learn it in a school, which is why your work is so important. We in McKinsey, where I worked until the beginning of September, as the chairman said, wrote a report last year on how schools can keep improving. And we looked at 20 education systems around the world. All of them had some data that showed they'd improved significantly over a significant period of time. So it was sustainable growth and improvement. And there was a very encouraging aspect of that, which is that whatever your stage of development as a system, whether you're a bad system getting better or a good system like Singapore getting even better, wherever you come from, wherever you start, you can improve in a significant way, measured in pupil outcomes within a 6-year period. Large systems can improve significantly within a 6-year period. This is very encouraging. That's why I think the next decade is a decade of promise, because if we apply the right knowledge, all of our systems around the world can improve. And it's one of those areas where if another country gets better, it's good for all of us. So it's not a zero-sum game. We can all improve our education systems simultaneously. Here are 4 of the countries in the sample: Chile, Latvia, Saxony in Germany, and Hong Kong. All of them with different starting points, all of them having made significant improvement measured in those international comparisons, in this case PISA, over a 6-year period. What we discovered from that research is that the reform you apply to a country needs to change as the country improves. So what works now in Singapore would not work in Pakistan, where I was working yesterday and the day before, and will be working later in the week. Pakistan has a very poor education system, many challenges. They've got to get all the children to go to school. They haven't achieved that yet. When the children get there, they need to learn something. Their teachers are not highly skilled teachers like the teachers in Singapore. So in Pakistan, the reform that works there will be very different from a reform that works in Singapore. And in Thailand, you need to think about where you are on this journey from poor to fair and fair to good and good to great and so on, and put together a combination of reforms. So if you're on the poor to fair journey, like Pakistan, these are the things that will work. And we looked at the systems listed down the bottom there: Minas Gerais in Brazil, and Western Cape in South Africa, and Chile. And we found that what worked in those countries is helping the teachers do their job, providing scaffolding and motivation, giving them scripted lessons, giving them focused time to do the teaching, coaching them on how to implement the curriculum, making sure that the system visits schools and checks what's going on, building in incentives for high performance, and so on. So that in a poor to fair journey like Pakistan, or the systems listed here, the system needs to pay attention to top-down management, really focusing on giving some teachers who need a lot of help very careful, scripted ways forward. They need to check that all the schools are getting to minimum standards, and they need, of course, to make sure that the children get into school. So that's one end of the spectrum, but if you do these things, the system will improve. That's what the systems listed here prove. And in Punjab, the part of Pakistan where I'm working, I'm very confident that within 12 months we'll see significant improvement by applying this set of policies. Then go to the other end of the spectrum. So this is just one example of Minas Gerais, in a big province of Brazil, 18 million people. Look at the improvement they got in 4 years in 8-year-old reading. Big percentages. They were the 5th best province in Brazil in 2006, and by 2010 they were the best province in Brazil. But if you go to the other end of the spectrum, a good to great system like Ontario in Canada, or the journey that Singapore has been through in the last decade, that needs a different kind of reform. Here, you don't want the center of the system to tell teachers exactly what to do, because you already have good teachers. They can work out for themselves what to do. They don't like being told every day, do this, do this, do this, do that. They need to be given the skills and then the space in which to operate, because they can learn from each other. And you will hear from Julie Hu later on from Raffles Girls' School how the teachers there are working together collaboratively with research to improve their practice. So in these systems, it's about constantly making sure you're recruiting good people into teaching, making sure that the caliber of people coming into teaching is of a very high standard, making sure that as they come in, they get very well trained at the beginning of their careers. And then once they start teaching, they need to keep getting better. In the modern world, you can't learn all you need to know at the beginning of a career and then just do what you learned at the beginning. You have to keep getting better, keep learning new things, keep learning from your colleagues. So professional development at the school level becomes absolutely fundamental. The way in which teachers get data on their student performance, the way in which they learn from each other, the way in which they see each other teach and learn better practices, that is fundamental. In the United States, a few years ago, and it's probably still true in large parts of the United States, teachers get better for the first 3 years of their teaching career, and then for the next 37 years, their performance doesn't improve at all. That's not a very exciting career, and it's not what a school system needs. We need people who get better at teaching all the time. So tomorrow, they're a better teacher than they were yesterday, and that's happening every day. So these are very, very important aspects of improving the quality of good systems to make them even better. And as it says here, you need to devolve, as a system gets better, you devolve more responsibility to the school level because you have higher quality people who can make better decisions for themselves than the center can make for them. And as systems get better, the balance of accountability and building the capability of teachers changes. So with a port affairs system like Pakistan, you need very strong accountability and also an equal amount of investment in teachers' skills. So in Pakistan, the data is being published on progress regularly, but we're also investing in lesson plans and basic training for the teachers to enable them to teach better. That's a balance of accountability and capability building. And then what you see, as systems get better, you still need a balance of accountability and capability building, but the capability building part of it becomes more important. And so as Thailand improves, investing in the high quality professional development at the level of the school becomes fundamental, and for the schools to learn from each other becomes fundamental. Here you see Long Beach, which is a district in California that has done really well by investing in the quality of the people it recruits, the training of those teachers, and then their professional development and the quality of the school leaders. And you see very significant improvement over a long period of time in Long Beach, going back to 1993. So 20 years nearly of steady improvement. It's an exceptional school district. The other thing you see in the very high-performing systems like Singapore is not only is the system as a whole good, but all the subgroups, all the different ethnic minorities are improving as well. So improving to a high standard doesn't mean wider gaps between the best and the lowest performers. On the contrary, this data from Singapore shows very clearly that as the system improved, the Chinese, Malay and Indian groups in Singapore all improved, and indeed the Malay and the Indian children, as you can see here, almost caught up with the Chinese students over a 20-year period. So top performance also means narrowing achievement gaps. So summarizing, in the top performing systems, there are 6 things that really make a difference. And these are lessons that would be very relevant to the new government in Thailand. Set challenging standards, set the expectations of children, what you want them to learn. So in mathematics, set standards in Thailand that would match the best in the world. Expect children in Thailand to be as good at maths as they would be if they were in any other country. Make sure that teachers are coached, trained at the beginning and then coached and developed when they join the teaching profession, when they work in a school, so that somebody in the school is helping them improve all the time. As the system improves, make entry into teaching more selective, make it harder to get into teaching as the system improves, so that teaching becomes a career of choice for talented young people. We worked very hard at this in England over the last 15 years, so it's now the bar you have to get over to get into teaching is higher, but we have more people wanting to be teachers than ever before. From Oxford and Cambridge now, going into teaching is the top recruiter. So teaching is the top recruiter from our best universities. That wasn't true 15 years ago. We've also made it possible in England for people who chose a different career like banking or finance or media to switch into teaching and to be trained then. There are many people who in their late 20s or early 30s have spent time successfully in a career but would like to switch into teaching if they could. So it's a good idea to make that possible, because that's another source of talented people. The fourth lesson here, make sure that schools are well led, they have good head teachers or principals, and that those people are well trained. I'll come to that in a minute. Where you have failure in a system, the system needs to do something about it. Some systems neglect failure. They focus on improving the system, but they don't worry about the underperforming bits because it's too difficult to deal with them. But a failing part of a school system means failure for large numbers of children. And it's the job of the system on behalf of those children to intervene to improve a failing part of the system. And finally, systems need to collect good data and use it to inform decisions, whether it's in the classroom or the school or the local system or the national system. And underpinning that, as I've emphasized all the way through, the collective capacity of teachers is important. Each teacher needs to be getting better, but the teachers together need to be learning from each other. And on this slide, I've summarized the work of Michael Fullen and Lynn Sharratt from the University of Toronto, who have led the way on thinking about this in Ontario and other parts of the world. So getting teachers who have a clear focus on improving performance, who share their beliefs, who collaborate in the way that you'll hear from Julie Hu later. I won't go through all the list. So that the school needs to be organized so that teachers can learn from each other. The timetable needs to give teachers free time so that they can spend time learning from each other, so they have time to go and see each other teach. And then the system needs to support the schools. It needs to link the schools together, so you don't just get collective learning in a school, but between schools. So this is a big challenge for going from fair to good and good to great and great to excellent. And as I mentioned, the quality of school principals, or we call them head teachers in England, is very, very important, and increasingly the evidence shows this. And here are some quotations that make the point. It's very clear, for example, that when you look at the data around the world, the most important influence on a child's success is the teacher. And then the second most important influence is the principal. But because the principal is also the orchestrator of all the teachers, actually in some ways the principal is the most influential, because they're often selecting the teachers and creating the climate within which the teacher can work. So getting good principals is really important. And if you look what's happened over the last 10 to 15 years, around the world, systems are getting much more thoughtful and deliberate about recruiting from the teachers good people to become principals, about training them effectively before they become principals, about supporting them when they first get a job as a principal, and then about building those principals into networks after they've become a principal so they keep learning how to do the job better. I think in the past, many education systems thought leaders were born and could just walk into a job and be an effective school leader. Now they're much more systematic about it. Last year, we did a small report in McKinsey on how 7 or 8 education systems around the world were recruiting, training and developing their principals. And the data I'm about to show you is from that report. It's called the Leadership Premium. One thing you find is when you ask principals what they think is the most important part of their job, they say it's helping teachers get better. So developing staff, and here you see from the systems in the sample that in all of the systems, fairly consistently, about 80% of principals think developing teachers is their most important job. But then when you ask them, well, is that actually what you do? That's what they believe. But then we said to them, is it what you do all day? And the answer turned out no. Although they believe they should spend their time developing teachers, actually they don't spend their time developing teachers in many of these systems. New York, about half of them said they spent a big part of their time working with teachers, but in some of the other systems it's under 30%. So one challenge for principals or head teachers is to find the time and create the circumstances in the school where they, with their senior team, can work with the teachers to improve their practice. How do they do that? Well, 2 systems, and you're going to hear from Julie Hu later on, that have really worked on the selection of principals are Singapore and Ontario. Singapore has a 6-month training program for principals in which they visit other schools, they go abroad, they work in a business, and it's highly selective, very intense preparation for becoming a principal. And not all of the people who do that program can become principals, only those who are successful. But it's a very deliberate, well thought through training program. In Ontario, in one of the best school districts, they have a succession planning plan. They have 200 principals in York, Ontario, and they have 800 people identified who might one day fill those 200 slots. And each of those 800 people is on a tailored individual training program, being prepared for one day becoming a principal when the vacancies occur. And then at the point of selection, when a school has a vacancy, an experienced principal is part of the selection panel. And if the experienced principal recommends somebody and that person is appointed, then that experienced principal has to help that person, the newly appointed person, become a successful principal after they take the job. So you're involving a principal from another school in the selection, and then they become the mentor to the new head teacher. So it's a very deliberate system for bringing people into the leadership positions and helping them be successful. So the underlying point here is they're not leaving it to chance. They're not just hoping that these people will be good principals, they're preparing them and then helping them succeed when they start being principals. If you ask principals, well, how do you learn to be effective? Some of them, as you can see, if you look down at the bottom, learn it from formal training, from leadership training events, but most of them prefer to learn it from being identified as a potential leader, from taking responsibility day to day. So if you've got a deputy principal, giving them more responsibility so they're learning the leadership skills in their daily job. They like learning from their peers. They like the experience of being a deputy. They like coaching and mentoring. And formal training is important, but it's not the way they prefer to learn. And again, you see this pattern across many systems now of building networks of schools or clusters where there's a deliberate attempt in the cluster to develop the next set of leaders and to use the cluster as a way of developing leaders. You see, if it just goes school by school, many schools are too small to develop their next generation of leaders. If you've got a small primary school and you send somebody on a training program, you've got a problem in the school because you've lost a significant member of staff. possibly for a long period. Or if you train somebody up and they become a principal somewhere else, you've made a lot of effort in your school and then they've gone somewhere else. But if the schools work in a cluster, they can become engines of leadership development. And again, I think you'll hear from Julie how in Singapore the schools are increasingly working in networks, not just to develop principles, but to solve problems collaboratively. So this form of organization is becoming increasingly the pattern. I'm coming towards the close of my remarks now, and when I've finished, you can ask any question you like. There's something I said that you want to debate, feel free to ask. If there's something I haven't said that you wish I'd said, you can ask me about that as well. Even if you put all the knowledge together that I've been trying to summarize in the last 40 minutes, even if you put all that together, changing a big system like the education system in Thailand or Britain or Canada requires leadership at the level of the system. It requires a ministry that is effective. It requires people in the ministry, administrators and officials, as well as politicians, who have a sense of strategy, people who can think through the steps to change a system. You see, however good the teachers in the school are, and the principals, somebody's got to think, well, where would we like Thailand to be in 2020? And how will we get there? What are the challenges in the world that Thailand will need to face up to, and what does that mean for our education system? And how do we turn that into a set of steps to succeed? That's strategic thinking. They need to, somebody in the ministry, politicians and administrators, needs to think, who in the world would we best learn from? Who is most relevant to Thailand? Which other countries could we adapt the practices and build them into our strategy? Somebody in the ministry and the politicians and administrators need to think, well, what sequence, what order should we do things? What's the right way of sequencing these changes? And when change is difficult, how are we going to explain it to the population? How are we going to explain it to the teachers? How are we going to consult the teachers and involve them, but also motivate them through a difficult challenge of changing a system? Change is difficult. It's not easy to reform an education system. If it was, we'd all have done it by now. It's a very difficult thing to do, and it can only be done with really effective leadership. What we found in our study of the most improved systems in the world is, in most cases, those changes were prompted by some external event, maybe some big crisis or some new report saying the system wasn't good enough for that country to face the challenge. So there'd been an external trigger event that started the reform. Then what we found is that in the most successful systems, generally speaking, the leaders stayed 5, 6 or 7 years. So if you take the top picture here, the strategic leaders, here we're talking about the administrative leaders, people who did the kind of job I did for Tony Blair, they generally stayed in post 6 years, so you get real consistency. But if you look at the US, for a district superintendent, the average tenure is 2.8 years. It's very difficult to do a big reform in 2.8 years. It takes longer. And so if you have a lot of turnover in the leadership, it makes it much more difficult. Similarly, if you look at the political leadership here, the average tenure in the 20 systems we looked at for a political leader leading an education reform was 7 years. But if you look at the average length of tenure for an education secretary in my country, it's 2 years. I've known personally the last 12 secretaries for education in England, and that gets me back to 1986, 25 years, 2 years each. Most of those people are completely forgotten. They made no difference at all. About 3 of them made a really significant difference, and they're all the ones that stayed 3 or 4 years. So you need some significant time to move a system on. So another challenge is to get that consistent leadership. Now clearly in a democracy there are going to be elections and the leadership will change. I know that happened in Thailand recently. So that's inevitable and good because democracy is a good thing. So how do you get the consistency of leadership in those circumstances? And the answer to that is you build a group of people at the head of a society, maybe in the education system, maybe in the business sector, maybe in the universities, but leaders in the society who help the political leadership set a strategy and then stick with them through it. There are many cases where systems reform successfully, where the party in power changes, but the strategy stays the same, because the strategy is based on evidence, and the evidence tells people that if you follow this strategy, you will get success. So that's a challenge for countries to stick with the strategy. It's easier if you keep the same leader. If you can't keep the same leader, it's really helpful if there are enough people who support the strategy to see it through. Which leads to this. All of what I've been talking about is getting the strategy right, and that's difficult. But it's only about 10% of the challenge. Much the hardest thing is implementation, making the strategy happen. And here on one slide I'm summarizing a large body of work, but there's a growing body of work that tells us how we can implement more effectively. I'm just summarizing it. The first thing you need is, what are you trying to achieve? If you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. So being clear about what the goal is very important, and what are the priorities. Secondly, you need a plan. It's amazing how many political leaders I've met in the last 10 years who might have some broad set of goals, but they don't have a plan. They don't know what they're going to do, in what order, they don't know when they're going to do it, they don't know who's responsible. So a plan that sets out the steps, the key tasks, and who's responsible. And then there's this about routines. Those of you that have had experience in government know that all the time in government there are crises happening. Things go wrong. Right now, understandably in Thailand, the government is focused on dealing with the floods. Right now in Lahore, in Pakistan, where I was yesterday, they're dealing with an outbreak of dengue fever. People have been dying in Lahore of this fever. So the government has to focus on that. All around the world, governments spend a lot of time dealing with crises, things that go wrong. And they have to do that. We all expect our governments to help our country through a crisis. But if the only thing a government does is manage crisis, it doesn't solve these underlying problems. You can't improve an education system just by dealing with crises. And that's why you need routines. You need to build ways of tracking progress. So when I worked for the Prime Minister, every 3 months, regardless of what crisis was happening, he reviewed progress with the education strategy, with the education minister, with the team, and we checked, is it working or not? If it is working, can we carry on? If it's not working, how do we solve the problem? So we had a routine that the Prime Minister stuck to, regardless of all the crises around him. And those routines are absolutely fundamental to getting things done. And then finally, and again I'm summarizing a large body of work, you need to make sure that the relationships are sound. One of the ways things go wrong in government and in education systems is where the relationships are bad, so people don't tell the truth. When something's going wrong, instead of telling the Prime Minister and solving the problem, they hide the bad news. So you can't solve the problem until the knowledge is open about what's going wrong. So working through those relationships. So all of my lecture up till now was about getting the strategy right. And this slide says, it's all very well getting the strategy right, but you have to have a plan for implementation. You have to be systematic about implementation. And now, the final slide. This is a very beautiful picture. It's a mountain called Annapurna in Nepal. It's the 6th highest mountain in the world. 3 years ago, I went to Annapurna and I walked round the mountain. It took me a month. I didn't climb up it, I hasten to add. I just went round it. It was a very wonderful month. And I look at this picture even now and it transfixes me. It's a wonderful picture. This was the first mountain in the world that was climbed, the first mountain over 8,000 meters that was climbed ever in 1950. It was a French team of climbers, and they were led by a man called Maurice Herzog. And it was a difficult climb because they had to map the foothills, and then finally Maurice Herzog and one other man got to the top. But it was getting late in the year, just before the monsoon came. And they got very cold, they got frostbite in their fingers and toes, and then after they'd been to the top, Maurice Herzog lost his gloves. They fell off his hands. They slid down the mountain. So his fingers started getting frostbite. It was a very traumatic journey. And finally they had to be carried down the mountain. And when they got back to Kathmandu, Maurice Herzog had lost most of his fingers and most of his toes. And then he went back to France and he became the Minister of Culture in the government. And he wrote a beautiful book about this climb. And the last line of the book is, "There are other Annapurnas in the lives of men." If he was writing it now, he would have written, "There are other Annapurnas in the lives of people," because he would have meant men and women. But that was 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Colleagues, our Annapurna is to climb the mountain of education achievement for all. We are the generation tasked with getting every child to the summit of their achievement. We are the people not only who have that task, but we collectively have the knowledge. We know how to do that. All we need now is the determination, not just to walk round Annapurna, but to climb our Annapurna together. Thank you very much for your opportunity to be with you, and please feel free to ask anything you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Michael Barber. Let me just translate that briefly into Thai, if I may.
Sure. The entire lecture.
In Thai.
Okay.
ครับก็ท่านเซอร์ไมเคิลบาร์เบอร์นะครับได้พูดถึงเรื่องของการปฏิรูปการศึกษาโดยเฉพาะเริ่มต้นจากการที่โลกนั้นมีการเปลี่ยนแปลงอย่างมากมายเป็นโลกที่มีประชากรมากยิ่งขึ้นเป็นโลกที่คนเข้าไปอยู่ในเมืองมากยิ่งขึ้นทุกทีนะครับรวมถึงมีความหลากหลายของวัฒนธรรมในแต่ละเมืองอีกด้วยนะครับนอกจากนั้นก็เป็นช่วงเวลาที่เป็นโอกาสเช่นเดียวกันนะครับถึงแม้ว่ามีสิ่งท้าทายต่างๆที่เกิดขึ้นในขณะนี้อาจจะแก้ไม่ได้ทั้งหมดโดยการศึกษาแต่การศึกษานั้นถือว่าเป็นสิ่งที่สำคัญถ้าเราจะรับมือกับสิ่งท้าทายเหล่านี้นะครับท่านก็ได้พูดถึงเรื่องของความรู้ในเรื่องของการปฏิรูประบบการศึกษาซึ่งเพิ่มพูนขึ้นอย่างต่อเนื่องนะครับแล้วก็ท่านก็ได้พูดถึงสูตรสำคัญที่ท่านมองว่าจะเป็นแนวทางสู่การศึกษาที่ดีสำหรับเยาวชนยุคใหม่ศตวรรษที่ 21 นะครับประกอบด้วย E แล้วก็ในวงเล็บก็คือ K บวก T บวก L นะครับ K ก็คือเรื่องความรู้ซึ่งในปัจจุบันมีทั้งความรู้ที่เหมือนกันทั่วโลกแล้วก็ความรู้ที่เฉพาะสำหรับแต่ละประเทศเรื่องของ T ก็คือความคิดนะฮะการที่จะสร้างให้คนนั้นมีความคิดก็เป็นบทบาทที่สำคัญของครูในการสอนให้เด็กนั้นสามารถคิดได้นะครับและคิดในหลากหลายรูปแบบด้วยกันอันที่3คือ L leadership นะครับเรื่องของสภาวะความเป็นผู้นำก็คือการที่มีอิทธิพลของตนเองนั้นต่อคนรอบข้างการที่จะช่วยทำให้ชีวิตของคนรอบข้างนั้นมีการพัฒนาเกิดขึ้นได้อย่างไรทั้งคนที่ทำอยู่ในที่ทำงานเดียวกันกับเราลูกค้าของเราหรือว่าสมาชิกในครอบครัวก็ตามนะครับส่วน E ก็คือ ethical underpinning อันนี้ก็คือเรื่องของการเป็นคนดีนั่นเองนะครับทำอย่างไรให้ส่วนของเรานั้นเป็นคนที่เป็นคนดีแล้วก็ใช้อิทธิพลที่ตัวเองได้สร้างกับคนรอบข้างนั้นไปในทางที่ดีเป็นในทางที่สร้างสรรค์นะครับท่านก็พูดถึงเรื่องของการพัฒนาโรงเรียนอย่างต่อเนื่องโดยเฉพาะเรื่องของรายงานที่ท่านทำตอนที่อยู่ที่แมคเคนซี่นะครับเรื่องของการมีแนวทางต่างๆในการปฏิรูป
ซึ่งก็จะแตกต่างกันไปในแต่ละประเทศในบางประเทศอาจจะเป็นการมุ่งเน้นในการพัฒนาครูโดยเป็นการกำกับจากศูนย์กลางลงไปยังส่วนล่างนะครับซึ่งก็อาจจะใช้ได้ในบางประเทศแต่ในบางประเทศอย่างเช่นในแคนาดาก็อาจจะออกไปอีกรูปแบบหนึ่งเพราะว่าครูไม่ต้องการให้มีคนมาจ้ำจี้จำชัยมากนักนะครับอาจจะเป็นการวางแนวทางมีการฝึกอบรมที่ดีตั้งแต่เริ่มต้นของการเข้ามาเป็นครูแล้วก็เปิดโอกาสให้ครูนั้นพัฒนาเองอย่างต่อเนื่องต่อไปนะครับนอกจากนั้นก็มีเรื่องของการที่การมีระบบที่ดีนั้นเมื่อมีพัฒนามากยิ่งขึ้นก็จะสามารถปล่อยให้โรงเรียนสามารถตัดสินใจได้มากยิ่งขึ้นลดการชี้นำจากศูนย์กลางลงไปนะครับสิ่งสำคัญที่จะก่อให้เกิดระบบต่างๆเหล่านี้ได้ก็คือต้องมีการตั้งเป้าหมายมาตรฐานที่ท้าทายเราต้องการจะเห็นเด็กเป็นอย่างไรในอนาคตอันใกล้นี้นะครับก็จะต้องมีการฝึกการโค้ชการกำกับดูแลตลอดเวลานะครับภายในโรงเรียนแล้วก็เมื่อระบบดีขึ้นก็ควรจะต้องทำให้มีความยากลำบากมากขึ้นในการเข้าเป็นครูได้นะครับพูดถึงเรื่องของการดึงดูดโรงเรียนให้มีการพัฒนาตนเองแล้วก็เรื่องของการเข้าไปแก้ไขปัญหาเมื่อเกิดภาวะของความผิดพลาดเกิดขึ้นนะครับนอกจากนั้นบทบาทของครูใหญ่มีความสำคัญเป็นอย่างยิ่งนะครับการที่จะเป็นเด็กประสบความสำเร็จได้ไม่เฉพาะครูเท่านั้นแต่ว่าครูใหญ่มีบทบาทสำคัญซึ่งที่ผ่านมาอาจจะมีเวลาของครูใหญ่ที่ให้กับครูน้อยนั้นน้อยเกินไปก็ต้องมีการจัดเวลาเกิดขึ้นแต่เมื่อมีการสำรวจก็พบว่าส่วนใหญ่ครูนั้นนะครับเขาอยากจะได้รับการรับเลือกให้เป็นครูอาวุโสเนี่ยจากการที่ตนเองได้เรียนรู้จากผู้บังคับบัญชามากกว่าการที่เข้าไปสู่การเรียนอย่างเป็นเรื่องเป็นราวอย่างเป็นทางการนะครับสุดท้ายท่านก็พูดถึงรัฐบาลจะต้องมีความเข้าใจในเรื่องนี้ผู้นำที่จะดูแลกฎระเบียบหรือนโยบายต่างๆเหล่านี้ได้ควรอยู่ในตำแหน่งระยะเวลาอย่างน้อย 5-6 ปีแต่ว่าโดยเฉลี่ยแล้วหลายๆประเทศไม่เป็นอย่างนั้นเพราะฉะนั้นเมื่อผู้นำอยู่ในตำแหน่งได้ไม่นานสิ่งที่สำคัญคือการมีกลยุทธ์ที่วางไว้ที่เหมาะสมแต่ยิ่งกว่านั้นก็คือการ implement กลยุทธ์ strategy ต่างๆต้องสามารถดำเนินการได้อย่างต่อเนื่องนะครับแล้วก็ต้องทำให้เป็นรูทีนให้เป็นภารกิจประจำของรัฐบาลเพราะแน่ว่าตลอดเวลารัฐบาลเจอกับวิกฤตอยู่เรื่อยๆครับนี่ก็คร่าวๆนะครับว่าเซอร์ไมเคิล บาร์เบอร์ได้กล่าวถึงเรื่องอะไรบ้างครับตอนนี้ถ้าเกิดท่านผู้มีเกียรติท่านใดมีคำถามขอเรียนเชิญนะครับ Now for the questions
What a very succinct summary. Thank you very much. I can't see anybody, so because it's in the dark. So if you,
please, if you have any questions, there are some microphones dotted around the hall here. Please make use of them. มีคำถามไหมครับมีทางนู้นนะครับเชิญครับเชิญมาดูมาเลย
Going back to your almost entirely, do you think the lack of any one of those components contributed to the recent London riots?
That's a really interesting question. At one level, at one level, the answer to that is yes. I do think that, and maybe the lack of all of it. If you know, the ethical underpinning is clearly missing in people who engage in that kind of activity, and there's a degree of frustration. I think Britain has a real problem with a significant minority of very poorly educated young people. But then the right also has very immediate causes. There's people who just seize an opportunity to create a bit of chaos and exploit it. But there is an underlying problem about a lack on all four of the elements of the equation, actually, I would say, for a significant minority of youth in Britain, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good morning, Sir Michael Barbers. Yes, as a Thai representative, perhaps in this room, I would like to say thank you very much for your excellent presentation and very informative. Yes, the ideas that you're sharing with us today, similar to your talk in this room, I believe that more than 50% of people in this room are also not only from Bangkok, but also from other places of the world. And what I have learned from your talk this morning, I would like to ask, as you mentioned from the last stage of your presentation, that 90% of success is come from implementation. And from your opinion and your experiences, what is the main obstacles that that you should mention for the leaderships in terms of improving the school system to getting better? What is the obstacles?
Okay. Well, it's a great question, and thank you for your comments. There are many obstacles to change. One is a failure to sustain implementation. So people have a good idea and they get started on it, but they don't finish. Think of all the times you've met people who said they were going to start working on their fitness and they were going to go regularly to the gym, go jogging, ride their bike every day, and they start on it, and after about a week they stop. So they join the gym, but they never go. There's a lot of people like that. That's how human beings are. And then if you multiply that up into an education system, there's lots of plans, but nobody ever sees them through in some systems. So that systematic approach to education is very important, and the routines. That's one. The second barrier is in any given system at a given moment, most people are quite comfortable and they don't want to change. People don't really like change. So you have to persuade people to change. And that needs some pressure, but also some support and encouragement. And above all, it needs somebody who can describe the journey. This is why we're going there. This is why we're going to climb Annapurna, because we want to do that. So you need to overcome resistance to change. And then I could mention more, but I'll just mention one more. The other barrier is people in many systems don't believe the change will succeed. So they expect it to fail. And because they expect it to fail, I often quote a Russian prime minister who was prime minister in the 1990s, and he resigned after a year or two in office. He said, "We tried to do better, but everything turned out as usual." He wasn't expecting to succeed. And if you can't persuade people that this time it really will work, they just sit and wait for the reform to go away. So there are barriers in people's heads. There are barriers because people don't like change, and there are barriers because people leading change aren't systematic about implementing it.
That is a beautiful answer. So very appreciate for your idea, and I think that your answer has completely give us a good idea. Important for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir Michael Barber, I'm Chatgao Pawiset from Rajapat, Sundusit Rajapat University. From your presentation, I have two questions to ask, and maybe it will be beneficial to the way that we work for our education in Thailand. First of all, I understand that the educational reform takes time, and since it is very complex and it is the very complicated process in order to run the reform successfully. To me, when you talk about your work, particularly the research that you have done all around the world, I just would like to ask the first question, whether it is from your model that you study from other countries. Do you think it can fit with the situation in Thailand? Can we use the same lesson or apply some in our country or not? And the second question is, that to make the educational reform successful, it isn't just only to work with ourselves or just to work with our own experience, but it means to get the cooperation from the other, or I mean that from the outside stakeholders, and get the cooperative connection with the others. And I see from one example that you give from, say, like the New York network and cluster in education. Could you please give more information or explain more about how to make the educational cluster successful in New York or in other part of the other countries? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, on the first point, I'm not an expert on the education system in Thailand. I'm in the presence of 1,500 experts in the education system in Thailand. But what I can say for sure is that the lessons from other countries are relevant to every other country in the world. Increasingly, if you listen to leaders of education systems all around the world, they're working very hard to learn from other countries. So I'm sure that the lessons, not just from my research, but from the PISA analysis and so on, they are definitely relevant to Thailand. But of course you have to learn those lessons and then refine them and adapt them to work in your particular country. You can't just take an idea from Finland and drop it into Thailand, or take an idea from Singapore and drop it into Britain. But you can learn a collection of lessons and then adapt them and refine them for your own country. Thailand has a precious and important history and culture. You don't want to lose that. You want it to be part of the 21st century, but you also want to learn from all around the world. So I'm very sure Thailand can learn systematically, but that's a matter for the leaders of this system, the people in this room, to do that. On the, you're right that education reform is complicated, and in order to explain it and communicate it, you need to simplify the messages. And just to pick up your last point on the networks, the report I mentioned called The Leadership Premium, written by myself and Fenton Whelan, published a year ago, which you can find on the web. We'll go into these networks and clusters in more detail, but they need to be, the basic rules are they need to have a purpose, a clear goal. What are they trying to solve? What problem are they trying to solve? They need to have somebody whose job it is to organize the network. It's not just about meeting every now and again and having a cup of tea. It's about systematically solving a problem so work gets done between gatherings, and they need to be recognized and acknowledged by the system so that people are incentivized and see it as worthwhile to participate.
And I think that I also would like to have the more information explained about how the New York educational cluster happened.
Right. Well, that's why I'm referring you to the report, because there's a whole section on it. But basically, in New York, the schools, they used to be organized in geographic districts, and then the then superintendent broke up those districts, devolved the budgets into the schools, and then the schools chose to join clusters with whichever other schools in New York they wanted to be part of, and those clusters provide services to all the schools. So they built the clusters from the bottom up. So the top of the system broke up the old hierarchical system, devolved the money into the schools, and then said to the schools, you choose which cluster you want to be in. So that's how they originated. And then they look at particular aspects of the challenge of educating children in New York and try and solve those problems.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Perhaps time just for one more question.
Can I come over here?
Yes.
I have a question with regard your concept of leadership, because I noticed that a lot of your explanation dealt with leadership.
Now, would you say that to be a good administrator of a school, it does not have only to be leadership and administration,
But at the same time, a good administrator must be a good manager as well, because you're
dealing with teachers. And the manager should have the right skills, like supervisory, which basically is a key factor in dealing and working with people. So I would like to hear from you on what you think about this.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I was talking about leadership in a rather specialized way of each individual having the ability to influence people around them. But in the case of an administrator in a school, they need leadership skills, the ability to persuade and influence people, but they also need management skills to hold people to account, to allocate tasks, to allocate resources. All of that is very important. In one way, you can think about the administrator in a school like this. The job of the administrator is to make sure that when a teacher goes into a classroom to teach a lesson, they have the resources, the materials, the motivation, the skills, the knowledge of the pupils and the data about the pupils to teach that lesson really well. So if the administration is good, the teacher won't even notice it. They'll just go to the classroom and teach their lesson. If the administration is bad, and they'll notice it because the timetable won't work, the wrong children will be in the room, they won't have the data, they won't have the time to do that professional development. So I think the way to think about the job of a school administrator is that you enable each teacher, each student to go in and teach a great lesson every time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think we have run out of time for this session. Thank you very much, Sir Michael Barber. Thank you very much for your informative presentation.